Right, hello everyone, and a very warm welcome to this session on improving physical and mental health. My name's Laura Crane from the University of Birmingham, and I'm your chair today. And I'm delighted to welcome our first speaker, Alison Lane from Trobe University, who'll be speaking on understanding emotion regulation in autism, a multi-stakeholder investigation revealing shared perspectives on support needs. Thank you, Alison.
My apologies, my eyes can't read the notes. Thank you for your interest in this session. I'm presenting today on behalf of Dr. Diane Blackwell, who I was very privileged to supervise her PhD. Briefly, Diane has provided a positionality statement and identifies as a white cisgender neurodivergent registered occupational therapist and researcher with a very deep commitment to understanding key issues around for clinical practice and with a lens of intersectionality and inclusion. My background, I am also an occupational therapist. I am a non-autistic clinician researcher, so I present with those positions and perspectives. In terms of my work, my salary is funded by Trobe University, but I receive project funding from a number of partners listed there. Largely, my work is focused in children and young people as well. So the challenge, as I'm sure many of you are aware, is that over 70% of autistic people will experience emotion regulation challenges, and that we know that these challenges significantly impact their participation and well-being. Emotion regulation underlies fundamental areas of development, such as managing the cognitive demands of tasks, social interactions, and effective communication. And it also underpins experiences of behavioural dysregulation. So as we know, emotion regulation supports are frequently offered and accessed by autistic people, but less is known about the acceptance of those supports and their effectiveness. And so Diane sought to address some of the gaps in the research in her PhD work, and in particular wanted to understand what constituted effective emotion regulation supports for autistic people, and examine stakeholder perspectives on those, both emotion regulation challenges themselves, but also the supports that were on offer. And in particular, Diane was keen to identify critical components of neurodiversity affirming emotion regulation supports. So she conducted 3 studies to examine these questions. Firstly, a systematic review of our current research on emotion regulation support. Secondly, a survey of autistic people and caregivers of autistic people to provide an opportunity for direct consultation about the nature of emotion regulation challenges and supports. And thirdly, a Delphi study of professionals providing services in this space. So the first study, a systematic review, included 25 articles for full text review. And essentially the conclusion from this study was that there was really mixed evidence for the overall effectiveness of emotion regulation supports with published data. The evidence was strongest in relation to techniques using cognitive reappraisal. However, there was limited supportive evidence for techniques which were focused on emotion recognition, awareness and control. As probably is not surprising, there were many areas of potential bias within the studies reviewed, and there were quite a few limitations in the methodology. You know, one being as we've heard a number of times, is that what's in the literature isn't necessarily representative of all of practice. So from the systematic review, there are a number of critical research gaps that were identified on emotion regulation supports, and perhaps the most salient of these was that we found very few studies that sought and then reported on autistic voices in terms of the evaluation of those emotion regulation supports. And so Diane's next two studies sought to begin to address that gap. So in the second study, Diane used a mixed method design informed by a participatory panel to really understand from autistic people and caregivers what their perception of emotion regulation practices were. And so you can see here that we had a number of participants in different categories. All up, we had 26 autistic participants and 19 caregivers. And the age range, as you can see there, was from 20 to 60 years in the autistic participants, and 24 to 61 in the caregivers, so actually quite a similar age range in both groups. And then you can see the breakdown there of gender in both groups as well. The study consisted of two parts, a survey with some more standard responses and then an opportunity for free open responses with regard to their experiences of emotion regulation supports and their reflections on the impact of emotion regulation on their daily lives. So we'll just report a number of the key findings today, not go through all of them. So one of the survey responses that I think particularly stood out to us was in response to the question of could professionals have better supported you with emotional regulation challenges. And as you can see, there's a difference there in the way autistic people responded to that question versus caregivers, with autistic people very clearly saying yes, that they felt they could have been better supported by professionals, and 62% of autistic people endorsing that view, and 47% of caregivers also saying that professionals could have better supported them. In terms of their reflections on what their preferences for the types of emotion regulation supports were, there was more similarity between the two groups, and in particular there was agreement that supports that were focused on understanding emotions, personalised emotion regulation tools and understanding neurodiversity were things that they really preferred and wanted in emotion regulation. But there was limited support from either group in relation to services that focused on learning socially accepted responses in challenging situations. In terms of the free text responses, Diane analysed these thematically and identified a metaphor, if you like, of a nautical metaphor, if you like, to describe each of the themes that came from this review. And the first was a theme of, from the autistic person's perspective, of riding the waves, which paints a picture of an often vivid and overwhelming nature of the autistic participants' emotional experiences, and picks up those peaks and troughs in the emotional regulation journey of the autistic individual. And then the second theme related to navigating uncharted waters, so really speaking to a struggle for understanding and finding the appropriate support for them at that time. The third theme related to crafting a unique compass, which was about identifying what those key components were that they needed to personalise their set of strategies and their toolkits for managing emotion regulation. And then lastly, a theme of them building a supportive fleet or a team around them to empower themselves, but also their families and the communities in which they worked and lived. In terms of the preferences for emotion regulation supports, we chose just a few quotes from the autistic participants but that we felt really exemplified the desires or the preferences of this group around the support design. So firstly, desire for having a support which really built up a strong internal sense of self, self-awareness and self-advocacy. Another which was focused on real-life application of skills and particularly being able to transfer those skills to different situations and contexts. Another reflecting on peer support and particularly with others who have lived experience to inspire me and tell me what helped them. And again, more concrete steps to take to handle ourselves as caregivers and autistic people, particularly in the middle of a meltdown. So in the final study, we sought to gauge practitioner views about similar questions and designs of emotion regulation supports. The point to note here is that we had a very large number of occupational therapists respond, but also a large number of autistic and neurodivergent practitioners respond to this survey. So we found good and important and rich data in this study, but it was from a particular perspective. So again, in terms of what we found in the Delphi study is that we were able to get good agreement amongst the practitioners on 19 out of 27 proposed elements that should go into a support, emotion regulation support. And again, similar to the data from the autistic people and caregivers, there was one element that was rejected, and that was learning how to respond in a socially acceptable way. So I'll just move ahead to some key areas of convergence across all three groups in terms of the feedback that we received. Firstly, that emotion regulation supports should be individualised and neurodiversity affirming, and there was a lot of coherence across the three groups around that idea. Also, secondly, there's a complex interplay between internal and external factors, with a strong preference for the acknowledgement within supports of the external factors that can impact emotion regulation. A recognition that there's evolution needed in support systems to be able to respond in a personalised way, but also recognise those external factors. And then lastly, thinking beyond the individualised focused supports towards more opportunity for advocacy by professionals for changes in environments and potentially societal expectations. So moving forward, we hope that this work really underscores the importance of moving from deficit-based to neurodiversity-affirming practices with regard to emotion regulation challenges, and that by centering autistic voices that we can gain more creative and in-depth ideas about how to address and support in this area. But also the importance of moving forward collaboratively, caregivers, autistic people, practitioners together, working together to identify the best ways forward. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Alison, and please do extend our thanks to Diane as well for that body of work. We do have time for a question, if anyone would like to ask one. If so, please do feel free to come up to the microphone. Okay, if I can take the opportunity to ask a question myself then. I was just really interested, obviously there was a kind of push towards this very neurodiversity affirmative approach, and I was interested because obviously your professionals were very affirming in their approach and also your kind of community groups. To what extent do you think that we're going to be able to make that push towards getting that more widely accepted, potentially to those who, for example, do push more kind of normative approaches and fitting in towards social skills and so on?
Yeah, well, I think that's the critical question, right, is how we move from these ideas and thinking to generalising that, implementing that as at scale. in practice. I think it's important to note that our practitioner sample was very strongly skewed to the neurodivergent, identified as neurodivergent, so they would come with a particular perspective on this. I think what was very clear from us in starting with reviewing the current literature is the absence of these ideas in the literature. So I guess the hope is by doing this work and adding that to the literature and talking about that and giving practical ideas of how to build new emotion regulation supports that are neurodiversity affirming, that we can then show, I guess, the way to different practice at scale.
Fabulous, and it relates, I guess, TC's talk about the importance of it takes one to create that village and make change. Brilliant, thank you so much, Alison.